This is the Intellectual Investor Podcast, special episode, Crazy Money Podcast Interview. For more episodes, go to investor.fm, or to read this article instead, head to contrarianedge.com. In this interview with Paul Ollinger of the Crazy Money Podcast, Vitaliy and Paul cover a variety of topics touched on in Vitaliy's new book, Soul in the Game. From growing up in Russia and emigrating to America, to the ways in which more money won't make you happier, to lessons from the lives of classical composers, and Vitaliy's recent thoughts on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This insightful conversation covers a lot of ground. Enjoy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Crazy Money. This is your host, Paul Ollinger. My guest today is Vitaliy Katsenelson. He's an investor, writer, and author of the new book, Soul in the Game, The Art of a Meaningful Life. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the author of The Black Swan, calls the book deep, insightful, inquisitive, and civilized, which is a pretty good description of Vitaliy himself. Today, he and I discuss what it was like growing up in Russia, north of the Arctic Circle, how America did and did not fit with his expectations, which were set by all the American movies he had seen before he arrived at age 18, whether rich people are actually happier, what we can learn about careers in comparison from Franz Schubert and Beethoven, what it means to be a student of life, and what may or may not happen in Ukraine. Now, we did record this in June of 2022. This is coming out in July. So I can't say what has or hasn't happened in the meantime, just so you know. Before we jump into it, I want to say thank you to my good friend Rob Joseph for introducing me to Vitaliy's work. As always, his recommendation is spot on, and I hope you will also follow up and become a subscriber and fan of Vitaliy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Vitaliy Katsenelson. Vitaliy Katsenelson, welcome to Crazy Money.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Vitaliy, you manage a lot of money for yourself and for your investors, but you also write a lot about life, the markets, stoicism, music. How and why did you get started writing?
Okay. So there are two different stories how I got started writing about investing, and then different story how I got started writing about life and other stuff. So I started writing in 2004, the Street.com was looking for somebody who was in the industry, and they were looking for people to comment on stocks in the market. And so they gave me a chance. And so I started writing for the first time, and I really, really enjoyed it. So that kind of became part of how I started to think about stocks or the markets. I would just sit down and write. And that became almost like a second nature to me. This is how, I started to think through writing. Over time, I started to if you write about stocks and economy long enough, things start to repeat because the market is going down today. I would argue it's very similar.
No.
Yeah, it's just the same way it went down in 2001. So at some point, it gets a little bit monotonous. So I started to write about life. And in the beginning, those were very sheepish efforts because who am I to write about life? When I write about investing, I got a CFA, I got a master's degree in finance, I manage money. That was kind of part of my identity. So I had plenty of confidence to write about this because I knew what I was talking about. Writing about life, it's such an ambiguous topic, right? About parenting, kids, Stoic philosophy, classical music. It took me a while before kind of build up the confidence to realize all I can do is just be myself. And all I can do is just tell people what I think about different topics. And if they're interested, they'll read it. If they're not, they won't. That's all I can control. So that's how I started.
Why is it important for an investor to understand his or her life goals?
Well, I think it's important for a human being. I mean, behind every investor, there's a human being.
Forget that sometimes.
Hopefully, unless you trade with against the computer, then no. But I think if you look at our identities, we have more than one identity. I'm a lot more than just a person who invests. I'm also a person who loves to read. I'm also a father, a husband, a son, and I'm also a person who has my own goals, for life. So I was given a gift of writing. And I can apply this gift just to investing or to other topics as well. And by the way, the best way to learn about something is to write. So as I mentioned, as I've been learning about, investing through writing, same thing about life. I learned a lot about life through writing as well.
Every time you start an essay, do you have an idea as to where you want to take it? And does sometimes in the middle of writing that essay, you find yourself going in a different direction?
That is such a great question. I often find myself that whenever, the reason let me tell why I love writing, and that's going to answer this question. Writing is a very creative process where when I sit down to write, there is always a lot of trepidation because I have no idea how it's going to look like when I'm done. No idea. And this discovering what I think, I really enjoy that. I don't enjoy it all the time because a lot of times it's very painful. But that's what keeps bringing me to writing, because a lot of times when I finish writing it, I look at this and say, oh my God, this is interesting. I didn't know I think that. So that's why writing is so dear to me, because that's how I learn and discover.
You have a unique background. As an American, you came to this country when you were 18 years old. Mm-hmm. What was your childhood like?
So I grew up in Murmansk, Russia. If you look at the map of Russia and you look up, very up, look to the left, and you see Norway and Finland. Look at the very tip of Norway and Finland, and that's where Murmansk is. So it's above the Arctic Circle, where
so it's cold.
It's very cold and very little sunlight in the wintertime, and white, beautiful nights in the summertime. So there is you get the best, it's phenomenal in the summertime. It could get very depressing in the wintertime. I would argue that in the wintertime, Murmansk makes Seattle looks like a sunshine town. So I grew up like in my late 70s, throughout 80s. That's kind of my childhood in Murmansk, in the Soviet Russia. So a lot of my life was shaped by by Russia kind of turning from communist country into kind of a more open society. Times it was a tough life, but I would not trade it for anything. It's one of those things. So I'm in Denver right now, which is probably the opposite of Murmansk, right? There's a lot of beautiful sunshine. And if my kids went to Murmansk or would kind of move to Murmansk, they would have been depressed. The contrast between their life today and life in Murmansk would have been stark. Where I did not know any better that we had, when I went shopping to the store, we had two sugars. One was 90 cents, another one was ruble and 4 kopecks. So that's over 4 cents. And it was like this throughout my life in Murmansk, where we had bare shelves of very little food. But again, I never went hungry. I was always fed. I didn't care that I only had one pair of jeans, and I only one or two sweaters. None of those things mattered, because I was just, my parents loved me. I had a lot of friends. And that's, at the end of the day, that's kind of all that matters. It's kind of, the relationships. I wasn't hungry, so I didn't have to worry about hunger. But I just, I had a phenomenal family, good relationships. And at the end of the day, if you think about life in general, that's all that matters.
Why did you come to the United States, and what did you think when you got here?
It's kind of interesting. So what you have to understand, in the late 80s, early 90s, Russia was suddenly inundated with a lot of American movies. In fact, in the basements of apartment buildings, you would have these little movie theaters pop up. Imagine you have a basement and you have 5 TVs connected to one VCR, and they would play American movies where every part of the movie is dubbed by the same actor, right? If you think about Hollywood probably 80% of the movies they make happen on the coast, either New York or California or West Coast. Okay, so when I thought of the United States, I thought of basically a lot of skyscrapers everywhere. And then when we moved to Denver, I discovered that it's very flat and very few skyscrapers. So at first, that was a culture shock.
What were the movies you saw before you left Russia?
So
movies. Did you see Footloose or Risky Business?
No, I think I saw Risky Business in the United States, but I'll give you a few. So Moscow on the Hudson was like the classic one. Robin Williams.
Right.
But but there was a lot of movies with Schwarzenegger and Stallone, like the Tango and Cash, the Rambos, and the all the good ones from the mid 80s. The last movie I saw in Russia was with Steve Martin and Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Fantastic movie. Michael Caine.
Michael Caine, yes. It's kind of interesting. You don't think about this, but movies are an incredible. When I was growing up in Russia, I was brainwashed, which I learned to hate the United States, because what I learned about the United States was that Black people are oppressed. There's a lot of poverty. All people think is about money. People are poisoned by with hamburgers. And that part was true.
and soda. And soda.
Yeah, no, this mostly spent time on hamburgers though. Yeah. And then when we came to the United States, we were invited by my aunt who left Russia in 1979. And she was one of those people who moved to Brooklyn. One of those early Russian immigrants who moved to Brooklyn. And then she moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and married a rabbi. And he had a synagogue in Cheyenne, which is shocking me that there are any Jewish people in Cheyenne, but there might be.
The rabbi of Cheyenne.
The rabbi of Cheyenne. And what was amazing, when we arrived to Denver, imagine we brought all our belongings because we left Russia for good. And so we had, for each one of us, we had 2 or 3, these enormous duffel bags. And we get picked up at the airport by these strangers, people who just, volunteered to help my aunt to bring her family, to the United States. And these strangers basically rented us an apartment, furnished it, even gave us some clothes. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because all the stereotypes, I was taught in Russia how Americans only think about money and that's all they think about it, suddenly was broken right there, because these people were willing to help people they did not know. They just volunteered the time and money to help these Jewish immigrants from Russia. So it's a kind of the country that was painted to me by Russian propaganda ended up being a very different country. And by the way, also that image also been just like when you watch Moscow on the Hudson or you watch a lot of American movies, you can see that, that the country that was, that I was brainwashed about is a very different country than in real life. So the Hollywood actually had a huge impact on shaping Russian psyche, late 80s, early 90s.
How did you find yourself and how did you find a path? You were a young man when you got here at 18 years old, but now you're in an unfamiliar country. Your family has very little money. Did it take you a while to figure out how to fit in and find your place?
That's a great question. So I was 18 years old. I ended up going to high school, not to learn, but really to study English, because by this point in time, I already spent a few years in Marine College in Russia. So I didn't really need to go to high school, but I went to high school to study English. And I was shocked that everybody smiles in the United States all the time. In fact, when I went to Russia only once, since I moved here in 2008, which is 20-something years after I lived in the United States. And I was smiling at people in Russia that looked like there was something wrong with me. So
that's like New York City. It's kind of.
Maybe, yes. On the rainy day. I find that in general life, it's just a lot of things happen to us by accidents, right? How did I discover that I wanted to do investing? Well, I tried 6 or 7 different majors in college. Didn't like any of them, and then got a job by accident with an investment firm where they hired me because I had good computer skills. And then at the same time, I took a finance class, having a job and kind of working for an investment firm and taking a finance class. I realized I really like investing. And at that point, my life became so much simpler because I realized I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that I need to get a degree, undergraduate degree in finance, graduate degree in finance, and to get a CFA. And so I was lucky because I kind of figured out what my love is, like career-wise, in my early 20s. So that gave me this laser focus that I could just focus on my career. That's basically how I got into investing.
How did you convince your first investor to trust you with their money?
Well, I didn't need to, because what happened was I joined this firm as an analyst, and over time, this firm already had clients. And over IMA, yeah, I joined IMA. IMA had clients. The guy who hired me, Michael Kahn, he basically told me everything I knew, and so the clients did not need to trust me; they need to trust Mike. And over time, IMA's clients learned to trust me, and in all fairness, I've been here for 25 years. So since 1987, yeah. So for almost 25 years. So over time, I kind of earned my clients' trust. But I was lucky that I couldn't. There's no way I could have started this firm in 1997. First of all, I didn't have enough knowledge to start the firm. Second of all, there is no way I could find enough clients to trust me.
You know, the markets, we're recording this on June 14th of 2022. The markets have been destroyed over the last, if you're long anyway, if you're long the markets, you've gotten crushed. Pardon me. Is it more stressful to manage your own money or to manage somebody else's money?
It's a great question. I always manage somebody else's money, and my money has been managed like everybody else's money. So I'm not even sure how to answer this question, but the way we manage money, be incredibly process based, and therefore, when like yesterday the market was down 4 or 5%, like you would not know this if you walk into our office, because just like I was reading, annual report of company B, or listen to earnings call, I was doing the same thing yesterday. This market volatility really has very little impact on us, because if I was trading every day, that it would have impact on me. But that's not what we do. We are basically, all we do here is try to put a portfolio of companies high quality companies that we want to own for a long period of time, and we want to buy them when they're undervalued. What markets thinks about our companies at any given point in time, it doesn't matter to me. As long as nothing fundamentally changed about the companies we own, I don't care where they're priced on any given point in time.
Let me take another angle on this one from a longer term point of view. Do you take your performance annually? Is it hard not to take it personally if you don't do as good a job as you want to do, or if you don't beat the market?
There's so many ways to answer these questions. Okay, number one, like the people like me who are very competitive, we make a mistake of tying our identity to our performance. And I think that is extremely dangerous, because you have even if you make all the right decisions, you have zero control how the market will price your stocks at any given point in time. And the disconnect what the company is worth and where the market prices that could exist for years and years. So I had to teach myself not to tie my identity only to how my portfolio is doing. What Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, has this concept called the dichotomy of control. And it really talks about, and it's very simple. It basically says there are certain things that are up to us, many things aren't. Things that are up to us is basically, it's our character, it's what we say, it's what we do. Everything else is not up to us. So what is up to me is doing thorough, good research, making sure I follow our investment principles, etc. What is not up to me, how the market decides to price our stocks at any point in time. Therefore, there will be, if you're a disciplined investor, there will be years where your performance will be completely disconnected from what the market is doing. If you were a value investor over the last 5 or 7 years, it was a treacherous place to be an investor, because you were competing against stocks where the richer your imagination was, the more money you made. I'll give you an example, like Kathy Woods, who runs ARK Innovation Fund. Her fund was up 3 or 4 times, like from the lows of the pandemic through February 2021, I think. Her fund tripled or quadrupled. We haven't. And then, but these things usually don't last forever. And then, now she's, anybody who bought her fund over the time period is down on the purchase. So same thing, if you were a disciplined investor, you would have lost a lot of clients, not money, clients during the dot-com era, because clients would be dropping. If you had your own clients, they would be dropping you and buying dot-com stocks, which eventually blew up. So
yes, I was there.
So it's as a value investor, these monies don't last forever, but while you are going through them, it's a threat. It could be treacherous from the perspective of the fact that you have to deal with clients and you have a business and you're not doing as well as crazy money is doing. But then 2022 happens, And for a while, when the market was down 20%, our portfolios were up. But that was as good as it sounds. That to get there, I had to suffer for 3 or 4 years of underperformance at times.
You've written a few books about the first two are about investing. The most recent one is called Soul in the Game. It's out June 21st. Why did you take this angle on writing for this book? Because it's a departure from what you've written about in your previous books.
So let me tell you how this book came about. So over time, as I started to write more articles about life, I have a large subscriber base, people who just subscribe to receive my articles by email. And when they receive my articles in email, kind of the weirdest email you ever get, because at the top it's going to have my father's art, then it's going to have an article about life or personal story, then it's going to have an article about investing, then at the bottom it's going to have my brother's art, and then there will be a section about classical music. The weirdest, the weirdest email you ever get. And what I started to hear from readers that they came to me originally for my investment insights, but they really stayed and kept reading my articles for my life stories, which was an interesting discovery for me because, I almost looked at me writing about life as kind of a little bit self-indulgent, And a lot of people would always, tell me that, Vitaliy, you should take your life articles and turn them into a book. And I always resisted that. And then something happened in August 2020. I was writing this essay. I was going to write a music section about Tchaikovsky's sextet for string instruments, for strings. And I was kind of writing about this and researching it. I learned that Tchaikovsky suffered tremendously while he was composing this piece. And as I was reading Tchaikovsky's letters to his brother about Modest, about his suffering and struggles, I realized these struggles are not any different than the struggles I go through when I write. I mean, Tchaikovsky was composing music, I'm writing. He's a brilliant composer. I'm the guy, who's, struggling to write. But, we both struggled. And I realized, and so I ended up writing this piece. And after I was finished with this, I had this aha moment where I realized if somebody who is starting to write would actually benefit from this. And then I realized I wrote so many articles like this that could help people, not just about writing, about parenting, about other things. And I thought, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take all my life articles, put them into a Word document, and then I will, go, edit them and put them into a book, and I'll self-publish it. And literally, maybe a week later, I got an email from Harriman House, which is a British publisher, and I met them maybe a couple years before this. And at the time, I was working on another investment book, and they emailed me and said, "Vitaliy, how's that investment book going?" I said, "Well, that book is kind of I put it on ice, and I'm now working on this project." And I sent them basically what I had. And honest to God, I expected a very polite, kind of email from them because they're British after all, usually politer, very polite. And the email would say something, "Vitaliy, congratulations on this new book you're working on."
But that's not what we want.
Good luck, good luck with that. Yes. They actually came back to me and said, "This sounds actually very interesting." I said, "Oh, great." So let's, so we ended up, going with them, and we kind of came up with, and that's how this book came about.
You weave in stoicism, art, music. What can we learn, or what can an investor or just an ambitious human being learn from the work of Franz Schubert or Schubert?
No, Schubert. No, Schubert. He was French. He was Austrian, so it would be Schubert. If he was French, he would be Schubert.
We want to be sophisticated here on the podcast.
Let's call him Franz Schubert. I like it.
The Georgian way to pronounce Schubert.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. This is a person who was addicted to writing music. Over his lifetime, he wrote 5,000 or 6,000 pieces of music. And when I say his lifetime, he died in his early 30s. At the time, if you caught syphilis, it was a death sentence. And so that was a very common disease, in the 1800s. So he caught syphilis in his mid-20s, and he had 6 years of miserable life, 6 or 7 years of miserable life. He was very poor. The only love he had was music. So what can we learn from him? Well, here's what we can learn from him. So he lived in the early 1800s, probably, I'm not sure it's an exaggeration or not, but not in a few blocks away from Beethoven. At that time, Beethoven was the most famous composer. And when I say the most famous, it's almost like, I don't think like it's a Michael Jackson on steroids. Okay. Like even like if you were a composer in Vienna, it was very difficult for you not to feel like you live in Beethoven's shadow, because every piece that Beethoven composed, people loved it. And in fact, when Beethoven composed his Ninth Symphony, his last symphony, some people said that this is the way the music died, because you can't write a better symphony than Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which is, I'm so glad, first of all, that other composers that lived after Beethoven, like Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, and others, did not get the message, because we would have been, missed out on a lot of music. But Schubert, interestingly, published almost very little music during his lifetime because he lived in Beethoven's shadow and because he felt that his music is not good enough. The irony is today, which is basically 200 years later, we listen to Beethoven's music and Schubert's music, and we don't say Beethoven is better than Schubert or vice versa. We treat them as equals because they both were brilliant. And I think what we can learn from this, as we always, whatever industry we're in, there's always going to be somebody who is going to be this kind of the Beethoven of that industry. And we don't want to, the shadow of that person kind of be over us and stop us from going forward. What we need to do is to create our own shadow. So, Schubert did this. He just did not know about this during his lifetime. He died destitute, did not knowing that 200 years later, we'll still be talking about him. Just think about this. This is a person who thought he's nobody. And 200 years later, we still listen to his music. I would argue that's a success. But also think about how many other musicians during that basically, we know about Schubert because his work survived. But how many musicians who might have been as talented as Schubert or Beethoven, whose symphonies never saw the light of day because they never thought they were good enough?
So Tchaikovsky had vicious self-doubt. Schubert didn't feel significant relative to Beethoven. How do you use that in your day-to-day to continue to be aware of the work you have the possibility to do?
That is such a great question. And here's why it's a great question. Because you look at these composers, you listen to music of these composers, and you think that they were so gifted, that it was so easy for them to write this. And when you look at their personal stories, you realize all of them struggled to do this. All of them had to overcome a lot of self-doubt to create this music. And
they felt like frauds. They had FOMO. They had imposter syndrome. All those things we talk about
exactly.
today.
Once you realize that even those geniuses suffer through this, you realize that this is just part of the journey for everybody. And actually that is incredibly liberating, right? Because if you realize if they suffer through this, when we suffer similar emotions, we realize that it's absolutely normal part of any creative process.
I feel it all the time. I wake up I'm very excited to wake up because there's a lot of cool things that I do every day, but I worry that, am I doing the right thing? Am I really is this how I'm supposed to be spending my life? Is my work any good? I mean, I think it's a highly normal thing to do, especially for very successful people.
Anything that has any creative endeavor, almost by definition, it's creative because you don't have certainty. Like, let me tell you who has certainty. The guy who's working on Fiat's assembly line. He knows that he clocks in, he's gonna do the same thing over and over again. There would be very little variability in his day throughout his day. He knows when he clocks out. There is zero uncertainty in his life. And I would argue there is zero creativity as well. Anytime you introduce any kind of creativity, that means you're creating something that did not exist before. By doing that, that's actually, you have to, almost like when I think about anything creative, think about you're traveling through the fog, and you're driving through the fog, and you have your headlights. And your headlights, you can only see what's a few feet ahead of you. That's what anything created. That's what it feels like. Once you travel through the fog, and on you're on the other side of it, you receive an incredible satisfaction. But while you're going through this fog, it's extremely nerve-wracking, and it could be painful at times. But that's in my mind, to me, this is how I get meaning in life, by doing things that are creative, be it writing or be it investing, and especially investing when you are in the dot-com bubble and you are not, and you're sensible things and you don't own those dot-coms. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that concept, you introduce a concept in the book called, you say you want to be a student of life. What does that mean to you?
I think the worst thing that could happen to a human being is when you come to realization that you learn everything there is to know. This is when you stop growing. This is where you become arrogant. If you look at the world that it's a constant, when you wake up every morning, you're there just to learn a new thing, something new, then you're gonna approach life very differently. It's just everything you experience is just an opportunity to learn. I play chess a little bit, and I lose a lot. Like when I play chess, I lose a lot. But you know what? I actually condition myself to face these losses with a smile, because that's a part. Losing in chess, that's a part of the process of learning chess. I think one of the Stoics said, "It's impossible to teach a person who already thinks he already knows." I'm going to butcher this, but something along the lines. It's impossible to teach somebody who already thinks he knows the answer to everything. So, student of life is the opposite. Is this somebody who is always curious and willing to learn? And I think that's how you continue to grow. And as an investor, that's how you don't become arrogant, and which is very dangerous as an investor or human being in general.
I noticed your modesty when your intent to not represent yourself as an expert when you just said, "I play chess a little bit."
No, there's no.
You don't want to say, "Hey, I'm a big chess player." You say, "I try. I want to learn. I'm a student of chess."
Actually, there was in this case, I can safely say there is very little. Just because I have a Russian accent and I was born in Russia, I know people that gives it some extra points.
You're not Gary Kasparov?
But no, I got into playing chess again, and I write about this in the book, because my daughter, who is now 16, when she was 15, she basically. She watched Queen's Gambit, and she said, "Dad, let's play chess." And then my life and chess never been the same since.
That's so cool.
Yeah, but there was very little self-modesty about when I talk about chess.
There are other things, I know you practice meditation, and you had this concept in the book that I thought was interesting. I've been trying to meditate for 3 or 4 years now, and I do get a lot out of it, but I feel it's something I want to do perfectly, but there's no way to do meditation perfectly, right? And you have this concept. You said you look for one good or one perfect minute in one of your meditation sessions. And I thought that was a really interesting concept, because I spend 20 minutes meditating, and I feel like 19.59 of those minutes is spent thinking about the dry cleaning, the dog, why the world isn't recognizing me to the extent I want it to, etc. But if I just focus on getting one good minute, that whole session would be worthwhile.
That's right. Well, I think so. There are a couple of things let me address a couple of things you mentioned here. Number one, I think I misunderstood meditation for a long time. When I thought about meditation, I thought about these posters you see where this skinny, beautiful woman in a very athletic wear, sitting on the edge of the mountain, looking at this perfect sunset or sunrise, right? And it probably said serenity at the top or something. But that's
right.
And that's what you think about meditation. In reality, that's not what meditation is, and you don't need to do this in this perfect. You don't need to do this at the on the cliff of the mountain, looking at the perfect.
I spent $800 on a Lululemon meditation outfit,
and
it doesn't help me meditate.
Right. In fact, some people argue that you can meditate right next to like Jack Hammer, if you're very good at this, So, what it is, let me tell what it means. What meditation means to me. Meditation is basically me trying to sit and trying not to think, or just try to focus on something like in my breath. Okay. While I do this, I'm going to constantly fail at this. And that is the feature of this, not a bug. Because since you were a very little child, you were constantly thinking about different things throughout the day. And you trying not to think is not natural for you. So that process of trying not to think and failing, that is the feature of meditation. Now, when you try not to think, the thoughts will come to you. Your job is to try to observe these thoughts and to train yourself to become an observer of your thoughts. This is important for a couple of reasons. Because there will be a time when something bothers you. And since it's happening in your head, you don't even notice that because it's just happening kind of in your head and you are focused on something else. And if you train your mind to be observer of your own thoughts, and you see this thought almost like a ship kind of going into the sunset, if you observe this thought, then it neutralizes negative emotions. Also, and I'll spend a lot of time talking about this when I talk about Stoic philosophy. Stoics had a special, almost like a set of rules for dealing with anger. And they call it anger temporary insanity. And if you think about it, anger is temporary insanity, right? Because it's almost like somebody else takes over your body. You're not even in control of what you're doing. So if you observe that you're getting angry, that in itself actually helps you to neutralize your anger. Because once you observe anger coming in, all you have to do is just take time off. There's a lot of other advice I can give you.
Meaning, if you can view your thoughts and your emotion from a third party perspective, yes, it gives you some distance from the emotion in that moment. Yeah,
it's almost like a balloon that you just pop. Just by you observing it actually neutralizes that, yes. And in case of anger, once you observe you're getting angry, just like what I do, I just go into the next room. And I say this as a husband, as a father, as an employer, or as a person who is at the rental car counter, and instead of getting SUV gets a minivan or something, as a human who interacts in the daily life and things don't go according to my plan, But let's talk about the other thing you mentioned about. I call this concept that one perfect minute, or maybe 10 perfect seconds, whatever that number is in your meditation. I call this a minimum measurable unit or minimum meaningful unit, whatever MMU, whatever you want to call it. But basically, whatever we do, especially when we try to create a new habit, you find something that you can achieve. When I started to ride a bicycle, my first attempt was all I tried to do is, I tried to ride the bicycle every day. So my goal was just to spend 10 minutes on the bicycle every day. That's it. My MMU was 10 minutes on the bicycle. Then after a while, I tried to do is to have a cadence of 60 RP, 60 revolutions per minute for 10 minutes. And then it was small, it was measurable. And it was process based. When I started to walk, I wanted to walk every day outside. I said, I'm going to walk for 20 minutes a day, and I'm going to do it every single day, no matter what the weather is. So again, something that's small, something that's achievable. And when you meditate and you have this, 10, 30 seconds, 50 seconds of perfect meditation where you can actually block all the other thoughts and you just focus on breathing. And when you do this, it gives you a sense of accomplishment. By the way, also, this concept from a meditation, I also apply to my writing. When I write 2 hours a day from 5 to 7 every single day. And I find that I have very little control over the outcome of each writing session. The only thing I can control is that I show up with my computer at 5 o'clock, and I don't go on Twitter or on LinkedIn or whatever, check my email. Just for 2 hours, I listen to music and I focus on writing. That's all. That's all I can control. What I'm going to write that day, I have zero control over. But here's what I learned. Whenever there is a day where I spent 2 hours of writing and I wrote absolutely nothing, I forgive myself. I forgive myself because I know that if I do this long enough, then something will come to me. That active process of sitting and thinking, focused thinking, at some point, I'm just planting seeds in my subconscious. And at some point, these seeds will give a fruit. And I just don't know when. It may be when I'm walking in the park. This may be when I'm taking a shower. Maybe when I'm working out. And in the early in my writings, I would kind of judge myself, or if when I sit down to write, if I finish the article, I didn't. Now, all I have to do is just spend 2 hours of focused writing, nothing else. And the outcome of that, no control over that. And I don't judge, is not the right word, but I'm not self-critical about this,
Right. Changing gears just a little bit. In your opinion, are rich people happier?
No. We all need a certain amount of money just to cover our basic needs. That number is going to be different wherever we live. Actually, in fact, I read that in San Francisco, the cost of living is so high that $117,000 makes you, puts you in the poor category in San Francisco. Okay, yeah,
wow.
low income category. But anyway, but what I found that no, rich people are not any happier because after you covered some basic needs, you're just able to afford fancier things. But fancier things don't necessarily bring you happiness. One thing I found about money, that when you have enough money, and when I say enough money, let's be clear, when your income exceeds your expenses. This could be if you make $100 million and you have $90 million of expenses, or if you make $100,000 and you have $90,000 of expenses. But when you feel safe about tomorrow, that you're going to have enough money to pay your bills, it brings you a certain amount of freedom. That's about it. Money overall does not, I know a lot of people who have hundreds of millions of dollars, some have billions of dollars, and I didn't observe any more happiness in them than I observed in people who have a lot less money.
Just a couple of more questions on semi-topical things, but things that I'm very interested in your opinion about. Let's say a person has a whole bunch of money, $100 million. How much money should they leave their children?
That's a good question. Warren Buffett has a good answer to this question. And if enough money that they can do anything, but not too much so they can do nothing. I have 3 kids, and I think a lot about this right now. I feel like my job is to pay for their education. I may help them when they buy their first house or something. But my job as a parent actually is to raise them well enough that they become independent. So my job is to train them so they can face life on their own.
What does that mean? So what skills are you trying to teach them? I mean, okay, you're going to get them a college degree, but beyond that, what does that mean? How do you teach responsibility?
Yeah, so they can face adversity, because they face adversity and they know how to deal with that. So this is why when I write about Stoic philosophy, I was writing as much for myself as I was writing for them as for everybody else, because I find this Stoic philosophy, for instance, it's a great operating system for life. I also want them to be good human beings. I want it, and then and probably number one quality I want them to have is to be kind to others. That's very important to me. But how much money? I probably I think it's important to help your kids. So I think we look at the money a little bit in the wrong way. We usually think about we're going to leave money to our kids when we die. Okay, so usually, let's say if you are in your 80s, you leave your money to kids when they're in 50s or 60s. Well, at that point in time, that money is probably not help them very much. I would argue when they're in their 20s or maybe early 30s and they start a family, that money could help them a lot more because it could afford them to buy a house, or
right.
like in my case, I'll help to fund my grandkids, I don't have grandkids yet, but my grandkids' education at some point in time. So that would lessen the burden on my kids. So that's how I look at it. But if you give somebody who is in their early 20s millions of dollars, you're probably going to ruin their life, not going to help their life. Yeah. We're
officially in a bear market. What advice, what assurances would you give to people who are scared and anxious about what's happening in the market and with their portfolio?
Well, it depends on what they own. If they own Bitcoin, I'll have zero advice to them. Just like when my advice was very consistent, about Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrencies, NFTs or other things that are may otherwise, that you can't value. My advice was consistent. Don't. You are not investing, you're speculating. Well, couple things. Number one, the bear markets tend to shrink your time horizon. Like when you're in the bull market and everybody is giddy and happy, you are looking 10 or 20 years out. And assuming that's your time horizon, that's what you should be doing. When you go through bear market, your time horizon shrinks from years to months to days. So one point I would make sure you still have a long-term time horizon. Make sure you don't artificially shrink your time horizon. If you own the company that you felt that you've done your research and you felt was undervalued, and now it's cheaper, the price declined, you should be celebrating this, because either you can buy more of the stock, or if this company generates enough cash flows, it can buy its own stock. So like we own a lot of companies that, we have some companies who've declined a bunch, and they're buying their own stock. So that actually, in the long term, is going to create value for me as a shareholder. I think and I've written enough about this that I can say this without sounding like a complete jerk, but preparation for bear markets should not be started in the bear market in general. And I know it sounds like a jerk. You should not be investing, if you were speculating before the market and now you're down 50%, I'm not sure what advice I have for you. I sound heartless, but I just don't know what to tell you. If you
I don't own any Bitcoin, for the record. I don't own any NFTs.
Even though I'm looking at you when I'm talking to you, I'm not looking at you. My point is this. Over the last 5-7 years, we created a lot of fair weather investors who are doing incredibly well when interest rates are declining, when the economy is being inflated by all this quantitative easing and free money, a lot of money being printed. But we may be entering into a period where the economic growth will be a lot slower. It's basically entering into payback time for all the excesses of the last decade. I think we're entering into payback time for these excesses, and economic growth will be a lot less. And companies that actually generate cash flows, have good balance sheets, and have pricing power are the ones that will be doing the best. And I think it's still not too late to reposition your portfolio to those companies. One mistake people may make is that they feel like they have to make their money back the same way they lost it. So think about this. If you own a lot of .coms, and when I say you again, not talking about you, okay? But if someone lost a lot of money during .coms and they felt that they have to make money through those companies, a lot of these companies went out of business. Some of them recovered. You almost have to divorce yourself from your past decisions and look at the company you own. You say, well, okay, I made a mistake. I bought this company. I overpaid for this. The stock is down. Is this company, what is it worth? Where it's going to be 5 or 10 years from now? And what's important to learn is that usually what happened historically, the sector that declined, it was not the one who led the recovery. Meaning that if the bubble, okay, I'm going to say it differently. The same bubbles rarely reinflate. That's the point. Because when people lose money on the stock, and the stock, and it declines a lot, when it starts going back up, the reason it doesn't reinflate because they try to unload this company to get their money back. That's why, the same bubbles rarely reinflate. That's why .com bubble did not reinflate, the first one. And it took 15, 20 years for this one to come about, and it looked different from the previous one. So, those would be my, kind of pearls of wisdom
So good luck, Bitcoin people. But Vitaly's going to send you some bandages and a nice bottle of scotch to ease your pain, but nothing else.
In all fairness, I was very vocal. Like for the last many years, I've been very vocal about because a lot of people would ask me what I think about Bitcoin. I say I don't think about Bitcoin, and I explain all the reasons why. If you invest in Bitcoin, you're not really investing; you're speculating. And if this is a 50 basis points of your portfolio, 1% of your portfolio, why not? But if this is your portfolio, then I feel very sad for you.
All right, one last question, and this is unfair to you because it's an hour-long conversation, but we just have a couple of minutes left. What are your thoughts on what's happening in Ukraine, and what might happen over the next gosh knows how long.
I agree with the unfairness of this question because I just wrote 4 articles. It's almost like a mini book on Ukraine.
Oh, well, this is a great way to play. Let's talk about where our listeners can find it.
There are 4 articles. They can your listeners and viewers can find them on contrarianedge.com, contrarianedg.com. But let me give you one new thought about this. When the invasion happened, Putin used an excuse that, this war with Ukraine was his response, forced response to NATO's invasion, kind of NATO circling Russia from all directions. Then he had another excuse which was false, completely false, that Ukraine is full of Nazis, and then by invading Ukraine, he's liberating Ukraine, from Nazis. A few days ago, he was speaking at an event, and he basically compared himself to Peter the Great, and he basically said that Peter the Great's job was to expand and fortify Russian borders, and he basically said, so is my job. He basically admitted that this Ukraine invasion in Ukraine has absolutely nothing to do with NATO, nothing to do with Nazis in Ukraine, which is complete nonsense, but everything to do with him trying to expand kind of Russia's borders and kind of to reinstitute the Soviet Union. Why this is important? Because I almost look at Russia today as the Nazi Germany in 1939 when it invaded Poland. If we stopped at Nazi Germany then millions and millions of lives that were lost after that, the losses of millions of lives, 30 million of lives would have been prevented. But we didn't. And I would argue today is that today basically Ukrainians are fighting for our freedom. Our freedom because after he's done, Putin is done with all the ex-Soviet republics that are not part of NATO, he'll go into Baltic republics that are part of NATO. And since we haven't stopped him, he's going to think, well, we're going to do nothing again. And at this point, if we do nothing, and then basically then he's going to say, well, how about Poland? And, so at some point, we're going to have a World War III on a much greater scale if we do nothing today. So this is kind of, that's kind of I didn't mean to sound preachy, but that's kind of that.
No. And okay, so that's a good segue to close it up. So again, the place where you do most of your writing is at contrarianedge.com,
yes.
Correct? And so we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And your new book is Soul in the Game by our guest, Vitaliy Katsenelson. Is there anywhere else you'd like to steer people to find out more about you?
2 more things.
Vitaliy?
Number 1, once you buy the book, if you go to soulinthegame.net and you send us a receipt of your purchase, I'll email you 4 new chapters that I wrote after I wrote the book. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, we have a podcast that's called The Intellectual Investor, where basically my articles on investing topics, life topics, and other topics are read to you by a wonderful audio artist. So you get basically to get your articles to be almost like audio articles on tape. So and you can find them on investor.fm. And again, you can find my book on soulinthegame.net.
Excellent. Well, Vitaliy, I enjoyed the book. I'm glad I got to know you a little bit today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this interview. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, if you like what we're up to here at Crazy Money, do us and yourself a favor by following the show on your favorite podcast app and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Also, click the link in the show notes to subscribe to my new Substack, where you'll get bi-weekly thoughts on the role of money in our world and in our lives directly to your email inbox. Thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next week.
If you enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy Vitaliy's 2021 Almanac, a collection of his best articles from 2021 packed together with some art for a pleasant read. To download a free copy, visit contrarianedge.com/almanac. To listen to more episodes, visit investor.fm. Enjoy life and prosper.